Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Cameron Leinhart. I'm the pastor here at Conduit, and we sincerely appreciate you taking time out of your schedules, especially to come out and sit on a cool night to talk about a topic that certainly has been it's been heavy and really verbose in the news lately, although it's not really a new topic or a new issue at all. One of Conduit's missions is to be a catalyst for wholeness and redemption in our homes, in our churches, and in our cities. And we believe that goes far beyond things that you would just normally classify as overtly spiritual issues, but that have far-reaching implications into like justice of life for people, and certainly when you're talking about young men and women who are most vulnerable in society, our societal systems, that we want to be advocates for justice and safety and protection of them as well. Coincidentally, this is not something that we ever kind of really planned, but two of the presenters that you'll be hearing from tonight are pivotal members here at Conduit. We're very proud of them and the work that they have done and the expertise that they have in the area of human trafficking. So we're so glad you're here. If you have any questions or
Hi everybody, good evening. Thank you for your patience. Of course, would it not be 2020 if we didn't have technical issues for the past hour, but here we are, and we're ready, so thank you for your patience. My name is Kaylee Fazer, and I'm a social worker at the Child Advocacy Program, and I coordinate the Safe Harbor program. So, if you guys all want to come up here and introduce yourselves, I have with me a team of folks that all the time around these issues of human trafficking. So come on up, introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with our presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Candace LeBaron. I work for Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm a foster care caseworker. I've been working with Safe Harbor while I was pursuing my master's in social work at the University of Buffalo, so that's how I got to know Kaylee, and the Child Advocacy Program as well.
Hi, my name is Jake Staley. I'm an investigator with the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Office. I currently work in the Criminal Investigation Division, and so we investigate a bunch of serious crimes, human trafficking being one of them. I'm also a member of the Western New York Human Trafficking Task Force, which is out of the city of Buffalo. It encompasses 17 counties in Western New York, and it's a multidisciplinary approach team. So it's made up of local, federal, advocacy members that we can pursue trafficking cases and help the victims of the trafficking cases. So, thank you.
I'm Jessica McKeever. I'm on staff here at Conduit Ministries as our office and volunteer coordinator, but I also am the lead of the BRAVE program, which we'll talk about a little bit more later tonight. But before I came on staff here at Conduit, I actually was in the position that Kaylee was in for Safe Harbor for Chautauqua County. So we've been partnering up to bring this here tonight, and we're really excited to have a conversation.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so before we jump into it, just a quick content warning. Obviously, we're talking about human trafficking and exploitation, so this is sensitive information. If you need a break, you just excuse yourself, take a walk, leave if you have to, but we're here, so if you want to talk to us afterwards, feel free. Okay, so with that, just a brief overview. Today we're going to talk to you, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Child Advocacy Program where I work and the Safe Harbor Program. Jake is going to talk to you about what trafficking is. He's going to break down the elements of trafficking and the child exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation of children. We're going to talk about some common myths and misconceptions. I'll talk to you about who the traffickers and buyers are, as well as the victims, and what we see here in Chautauqua County. And then the trafficking dynamics that we see within these relationships. And then Candace is going to speak to you about the vulnerabilities and risk factors that make someone more susceptible to being trafficked, and then red flags and warning signs for us to look out for the youth in our lives. And then I will kind of wrap it up with Chautauqua County's response. Before then, Jessica is going to come out and talk to you about how, as community members, you can get involved in this issue. So if you have any questions, we ask that you kind of just hold them till the end, and we will try to make up our time so you're not here all night. So as I was saying, I work for the Child Advocacy Program. We have an office here in Jamestown and an office in Fredonia. Many of you may be familiar with CAP. Our mission is to end child abuse in Chautauqua County. And when abuse occurs, CAP coordinates a community response to bring hope, healing, and justice to the children and families that we serve. So CAP also facilitates the county's multidisciplinary team for complex cases of child abuse. Our multidisciplinary team partners include representatives from law enforcement, child protective services, prosecution, medical, behavioral health, victim advocacy, and other disciplines. And we meet once a month to review these cases. So it's just an awesome opportunity for us to look at things from a wide range of perspectives through different lenses to figure out the most trauma-informed and effective way to help these children. In addition to the MDT, the Child Advocacy Program CAP conducts forensic interviews, we offer advocacy services, trauma counseling, we do medical evaluations, and we do a number of community and professional trainings just like this, in addition to the Safe Harbor program, which I will talk to you about in just a minute. Now, so Safe Harbor, as Jessica said, she was the Safe Harbor coordinator before I started, and the Safe Harbor program actually started in our county in late 2016. But before we even got there, we kind of had to go back to the year 2000. So in the year 2000, there was federal legislation that was passed that changed the way our country defines and really looks at these cases of child sex trafficking. So under federal law, and this act that happened in 2000, a child that's under the age of 18 that is induced into providing commercial sex is always considered a victim of trafficking and must be treated as such. Prior to the year 2000, our laws read differently. We saw children that were engaged in commercial sex trafficking as prostitution. So they were treated as criminals, as child prostitutes. That's no more. So 20 years ago, this federal legislation changed. However, our social systems haven't really caught up with that. So that's where Safe Harbor comes into play. In 2008, New York State passed the Safe Harbor for Exploited Children Act and started these Safe Harbor programs. And it was, I'm not sure exactly, a couple years before 2016, they started funding. I don't know how much, you can probably see this pretty well. So you can see the state of New York. And all of the counties in New York have a Safe Harbor program like ours. We started ours, Jessica started ours.
Can you grab the mic?
Yes, sorry. I move around too much.
I put an extra long cord on.
All right, cool. So, great. So Safe Harbor started in 2016, and Jessica was hired as a Safe Harbor coordinator. At that point, she worked for the YWCA of Jamestown, and Jessica worked with the prevention educators. Those are the folks that go into the schools, and the different schools in Chautauqua County will contract with them to provide like sexual education and other programs. So Jessica was able to implement a age-appropriate curriculum in several of the schools in Chautauqua County, where she worked with middle school and high school students to look at like, what does trafficking mean? What does that look like? What are some signs and warning signs and red flags you might see? So she was out there in the schools teaching this, and we found out really soon that this was a much bigger issue than we had anticipated. So when Jessica was out doing these presentations, she would often have kids disclose to her that they were in fact involved in a similar situation that she was describing, or maybe they had friends or family members that were. And we found that there were other professionals in the community that then were referring these cases to Jessica. Kids would disclose to her. So maybe teachers, counselors, school nurses, etc. And we found out, as more and more people are disclosing, we figured that our community, like the professionals in our community, really weren't trained on trafficking. We didn't know. I mean, before I started doing this work, which was, I was introduced to Safe Harbor about the same time that Jessica started. I didn't even know like human trafficking existed anywhere outside of like New York City, right? Like I'd seen Taken, and that's what I pictured. That's not what happens here. And so the more education Jessica was doing, the more we're realizing that this is happening here. And so the program has kind of shifted. So in the beginning, we were providing this this education in the schools, but now the program also focuses on doing a lot of community outreach like this, training other professionals in the community, allied professionals that we work with to recognize these signs, And working with these different agencies that we work with, like I mentioned in our MDT, so different law enforcement agencies, different social service agencies, to streamline our policies for identifying cases where trafficking might be occurring, and then streamlining how we respond to them. So that's kind of the gist of the Safe Harbor program, and we will kind of take you through what the presentation looks like. So with that, I will hand this over to Jake. Are we turning it off now?
No, it's fine. Okay. So just so I can have a baseline show of hands, how many people are familiar with trafficking? I mean, not that you participated in it or anything like that, but how many people are familiar with the concept of human trafficking? Raise them high so I can see them. Okay, all right. So I'm glad that I see a lot of hands that are raised. I'll be interested to hear after the fact if how we explain trafficking to you guys is what your perception of trafficking is now. So I'll be interested to see. I'll ask the show of hands maybe at the end and see if you can remind me. And that just came at the fly. So can you guys see that? Not really. I can't see that, so you can't see that. So you're going to hear CSEC a lot. So that SCEC, and over on that side, I'll read it off to you since you guys can't see it. But that's what we talked about before for the commercial sexual exploitation of children. When when you read this graph that you're going to say every kid that's been sexually abused is going to fall into that exploitation, because that's not the case. What we're trying to say here. But sometimes that happens, right? And when they go in there, they fall into that CSEC category, and then we start to see things like the sex trafficking, the sexual images. With social media is huge right now. If any of you guys are parents and have young kids, you need to be mindful of the social media accounts that your kids use. The Facebook, the TikTok, the Instagram, the Snapchat is like all these social media accounts. These kids are getting exploited to. They're just subject to so much stuff right now, stuff that when we were growing up we weren't subject to. So we got to be mindful of stuff like that. We're going to go into something called survival sex, okay? So if you're a 14-year-old kid, you're a runaway from home, and you got no job, you got no food, you got no place to stay, what are you going to do? And someone's interested in you. A lot of the times you're gonna have to sell yourself in order to just survive. The basic essentials that usually parents provide for their children is gone when that child leaves the home. So that's one of the things that happens in there. And then on the bottom one, as you can't see, there's dancing and strip clubs. I use the reference of, I don't know of a strip club owner that checks girls' IDs when they want to employ them there. So really, we think about it as when you want employment, you're going to be 18 years old, but that's not necessarily the case with business opportunities like that. How about this in the back? Can you guys see this one in the back or not really? Probably can't read the little words, but the difference between trafficking and prostitution, right? While prostitution is illegal, right? Trafficking is illegal, but with trafficking, you have a third party benefiting from what the victim is putting in the work for, okay? So in other words, you have the buyer for the sex, then you have the victim, the girl, then you have the trafficker, right? The trafficker is always going to exploit the victim for his benefit, whether that be drugs or money or labor. We're going to go into labor trafficking too. But a lot of times people will say, oh, well, she's just a prostitute. She wants to do this. That's not necessarily the case. We're going to go into something where a lot of these traffickers are very, very charismatic people. And what they'll do is they will find a chink in your armor, right? They're very good manipulators, and they will manipulate people to do for them what they want. And so we see this quite frequently, especially with children. Children are very impressionable. Like, how many of our kids do we want to set good examples for because we want to impress them good morals, right? That's no different than with the traffickers of today. Like, they understand the concept of manipulation very, very well. So I want you guys to remember a third party is going to benefit from the trafficking, okay? Because that's real important to determine the difference between the trafficking crimes. When we think of trafficking, though, think of trafficking as like an umbrella. And under that umbrella comes two crimes, okay? You can't charge someone with human trafficking. You can charge them with sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And for those of you that can't see it in the back, I wish I had one of those laser pointers. But
I got you, bro.
look at that. This one, laser? The one that says
The
laser?
one that says laser. Yeah.
I got that. So when you see the difference between sex trafficking and labor trafficking, right? Both illegal in the state of New York, both illegal on the federal side too, okay? I want you guys to look at the recruitment, right? Harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining a person. That's the same on each side, right? So we see that it's familiar, although the concept is different, right? Between the labor trafficking and the sex trafficking, because they're two different things, but the elements are here as well as here. We're going to talk about this, the force, fraud, and coercion, okay? We're going to go through the elements as to why this makes it illegal, okay? For the force, fraud, or coercion. But anytime we see any of these cases, we need to establish at least one of these elements right here, the force, fraud, or coercion, all right? Down here, if you people in the back can see it, it says basically introducing someone into the sex trafficking that is under the age of 18. Yes, this presentation right here is for children, right? We want people to be aware of what to look for when children show high risk of being exploited or trafficked or anything like that. But just so we're all on the same page, this is applicable for adults too, okay? Just because it says 18, that would we consider the federal definition for the children. The state definition does not give an age, okay? Even if we wanted to take a case federal, there's still no age, like minimum or maximum on this. You can be however young and however old, but for this presentation, so I want you guys to have that in mind too, okay? So the elements, the force, fraud, or coercion, okay? And you guys cannot see that in the back. When I'm going to talk about the force part of it, how many? And I do this when I teach at the academy. I teach trafficking at the academy. How many people have seen that movie Taken? Yeah, I have not seen the movie, but I always use the part of like when he says on the phone, "I got a series of like skills, and I'll find you." And I've always wanted to use that, never had to before though. But when you see force, right? When that girl got taken in that movie, that would constitute force, right? You have your element there for the crime, the force part in it, right? So you can see a lot of physical aspect of it. I think we're gonna go in a little later on. We're gonna establish like different style of traffickers or different style of pimps, or the like two most common kinds. But you're also gonna see that with a forced drug habit, okay? Heroin, methamphetamine. You're going to see these traffickers identify the needs of a victim. Sometimes it's a drug need, and they will just chip away at that until that victim is solely reliable on that trafficker. And maybe it's just because they want to survive and they need their drugs to survive. That trafficker is going to be like, come with me, work for me. I'm going to make sure you always have your drugs, okay? But at the beginning, it might be a forceful thing, just to get them hooked on it. When we see another element of fraud, we see that a lot with labor trafficking. If any of you spent any time in the north part of the county, what's the biggest agricultural thing that we have is the grapes, right? So we have a lot of migrant workers coming up from Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador. And so they come up here and work for basically nothing, okay? Jobs that you and me don't want to do because it's very manual labor, right? But they'll come up here with the promise of good pay, a good house, and they get here, they got to pay for their bus ticket, right? If we were to pay for a bus ticket from the southern border and come up here, maybe like $800, they're going to be charging them like $3,000, $4,000, and they're going to charge them rent for their house. They got to stay in a in a 5-bedroom apartment. They rent a room, but they'll charge them something crazy like $500. And then you want to ride to work, you're going to pay me for the ride. You want a cell phone, I'm going to buy you a cell phone, but you're going to pay me the cell phone bill. Stuff starts adding up, and then you become so in debt to these people, these labor traffickers, that you can't get out, right? And most of these people coming from Guatemala or El Salvador, Mexico, don't know their rights, and they're scared to talk to police. So we have a real uphill battle when it comes to that. Not to mention that a lot of these times these traffickers have some serious connections, and they say, "You go to the cops, I'm going to reach out and touch your family back in Guatemala or Mexico," and that's a serious threat to some of these people. So a lot of times they don't want to cooperate with law enforcement. And then your coercion, right? I use a good example of a trafficker starts employing or trafficking a single mom, right? Mom might have a drug issue, or just might have a neglectful background with a child or something that issues a family court petition. She's in and out of family court, the kid's in and out of foster care, just a bad situation. The trafficker will know that happens. He will then use that against that mother and say, "I can either be on your side or against your side. You either do the work for me, or I'm going to go to family court and tell them that you're a drug addict, that you're out there having sex, that you're out there being a neglectful mom." And of course, then these women feel like they have to abide by the trafficker. So, when I talk about like people, like the human traffickers, the suspects of human trafficking, they're in the business of stealing people's souls, like plain and simple. Like, you are literally stealing someone's soul when you do this, barring the drug trade or burglars or murderers or anything like that. Like, these people are stealing souls, and they're ruining countless lives in the process. So just to reiterate, youths with this, right, cannot be held as suspects. And like I said before, we want to specifically hit on youths. This applies to a lot of adults too, but youths cannot be considered suspects in this. All right? Does anybody know? Weird question, but I want to ask anyways. The age of consent in New York State? Did I hear 17? 17. Okay. So we want to make sure that that just because there's a consent age in there doesn't mean they can consent to trafficking. Okay. Even though trafficking victims are some of the hardest victims to work with. They're mean. They're just downright disrespectful. But that's because they've lived a whole nother life than what we can ever imagine. And they've had to learn how to be tough like that. So I like the truths and the myths part, because when you see today's Hollywood description of trafficking, or sometimes even in the news, we get a false idea of what trafficking really is. So trafficking, well, yes, it can happen. It doesn't involve anything with a vehicle. I had this conversation with someone at work, and I said, yeah, she's being trafficked. He goes, "How? She's not in the vehicle." And I'm like, all right, well, that's not, yes, it has the word traffic in it, but it's not like you need to stop at the stoplight. Like, come on, guys, we got to think outside the box here. So that is like a misconception about trafficking. You don't need to be in a vehicle to traffic someone, okay? You don't need to go somewhere to traffic someone, okay? There's human smuggling, right? And we can get that over the border, right? We see that coming in through Canada or from the southern border. You will have human smuggling, but human smuggling and human trafficking are two totally different things, okay? I want you guys to understand that. The end result of the human smuggling might end up in human trafficking, okay? But right now, the smuggling, the coming over into our country, from Canada or the United States, that's smuggling. Okay, sometimes there's a big misconception with that. Yeah, the girl next door can be trafficked. It doesn't have to be someone from a different country. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can be. It can happen right under your nose. Okay. Sometimes kids are really resilient and don't tell right away, but that's why we have Safe Harbor. That's why we have the Child Advocacy Center, to be able to get some counseling for these kids and a place for them to open up and feel safe and hopefully talk about some of the exploitation that they have. You don't have to be physically restrained or locked in a room to be trafficked. They could be walking right beside you. Okay, they could be out, free walking around, and I think that's hard for people to understand and say, well, why doesn't that person just ask for help? Well, let's go back to what I told you before. If any of you mothers that have kids, if you believe a trafficker and he says, you're never going to see your kid again. Whether that be him by saying he's going to take the kid by force, or it's going to be through a legal process or something like that, and you already have a distrust of law enforcement, are you going to trust the trafficker? You probably will, right? Because he's got the hold over you right now. Anybody ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome? Am I stepping on you right now?
Go.
Okay. When a victim identifies with basically a person who's terrorizing them, right? They build a bond between that person. And as weird as it sounds, but for anybody who's been involved in domestic violence, it's basically the same concept. You stay in the relationship because it's what you know. You've grown affectionate towards that person, well, which is not healthy, right? But it still happens, right? It's almost like a survival base kind of thing. And when we go back to children, when they're out on the streets, that's exactly what's happening. It's a survival base. And sometimes, as awful as the trafficker is, sometimes they have that bonding in there. So, all right, you guys can't see that. Drug trafficking and sex trafficking, okay? I love this because people think that the money's in the drugs. I think that they're wrong, and the money's with the people, right? I think you can get way more money out of this, and for those of you that can't see in the back, I'll just read it down. So if you're a drug dealer, right, we're going to get drug X, not drug X like ecstasy, but just drug X, we'll figure it out. And I don't, these prices are pre-COVID, so bear with me. So we'll say you buy drug X for like $20,000 a kilo, okay? Your purchase price for that drug, you're paying that drug supplier $20,000. You're going to cut it with an agent, right? And you're going to sell 2 kilos for the $40,000. Your potential profit is going to be $40,000 or $20,000, okay? But once that drug is gone, it's gone. You got to start over again. You got to start from the bottom. You got to get more money to buy another kilo so that you can sell it again, okay? Whereas if you're into the sex trafficking, you purchase one victim at $0, right? You purchase one victim because you're charismatic or you're violent, right? Oh, baby, I love you. I'll treat you right. Come work for me. I can supply you this. I can give you that. What's that cost? Nothing, right? It costs time, but these guys are willing to put in the time because they're not going to work, right? They're out there trying to scheme people. And we'll say you sell a person 6 times a day for $50, right? And I'm going low on that. $50 is relatively low for some of the stuff that's offered out there. So 6 times a day, 6 days a week, that's $1,800. Let's say you work 50 weeks a year. That's a potential profit of $90,000. Not taxed, remember, okay? So this is straight cash. Let's subtract $20,000, and I'm being generous for that part. Your potential profit's $70,000. for one victim. Just imagine if you had multiple victims and you raised the price from $50 up for certain things. And when I'm honest, when I say $50, I mean that's low. So people are always like, concentrate on the drugs, concentrate on the drugs. Sometimes we need to concentrate on the people, okay? And sometimes that has to be people like you being aware of what's going on in the realities and what trafficking is to be able to combat that. Because this right here, to me, is huge. Because do we have a drug problem in Chautauqua County? Darn right we do. And stuff like this is just feeding the machine, feeding the supply and demand. We'll put it up at the end, but again, we have a multidisciplinary team approach to stuff like this. Us as the Sheriff's Office works with, like I said, the Western New York Human Trafficking Task Force, which I'm on. We have Kaylee at Safe Harbor, then we have the Child Advocacy Center, and so we all have like a unified approach to this pandemic that we really have going on. Because Chautauqua County, believe it or not, sees quite a bit of human trafficking cases. You might not read about it in the news, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but we do. We have a human trafficking issue here. We have established a hotline at the Sheriff's Office that you can call or you can email. If you need it after, you can't see it, come see me. I will get it to you. But that's for people to just leave anonymous tips, talk, have questions, whatever. You'll talk to me, and I'll try to answer them for you. And then down at the bottom, you can't see it, but it's the the Western New York Human Trafficking Task Force homepage. And you can just Google it. It'll be on there. It was up there, but you can't see it. So yeah. So that in a short burst of speaking is like human trafficking. And I think we'll talk about what we might see here.
Yep.
We'll talk about what we'll see here and some different stuff. So.
Thank you. So before we get into specifically what we see here in Chautauqua County, just to give you an overview, really to count human trafficking, it's really difficult. It's an incredibly underreported crime. I think Candace is going to talk to us a bit about why that is in a moment. But more or less, a lot of people don't report that they don't self-identify they're being trafficked. They don't know what's happening to them, that is trafficking. Other people are in situations where they can't ask for help. So for whatever reason, which we'll talk about, people do not report. So it's really hard to quantify how many people this affects, but worldwide, the Department of Homeland Security estimates that almost 25 million victims are trafficked globally every year. In the United States, according to Polaris, which is a great resource, so Polaris operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Way in the back, there's a safe harbor table with tons of information that you can take home with you. And if you're ever looking for more information, we would definitely point you towards Polaris for true, credible information about trafficking. But let's see, in 2019, over 22,000 trafficking victims and survivors were identified here in the U.S. 11,500 situations of human trafficking were identified. Over 4,000 traffickers were identified, and almost 2,000 suspicious businesses were identified using the human trafficking hotline. But here in Chautauqua County, so you can see this one probably. So as of June of this year, so June 2020, we have had a total of 107 kids in Chautauqua County referred to our program. So that doesn't mean that they were necessarily being trafficked, but based on the evidence-based tools that we use to assess somebody for their risk of trafficking, 107 kids met the criteria for that. So they're at risk for trafficking. And that's between late 2016 to the beginning of the summer. Of those 107, 17 of those have met the federal definition of sex trafficking. So that definition that Jake read to you earlier, 17 of those kids have met that definition. 55 of those were considered to be at high risk for trafficking, and then 14 kids identified to be at medium risk. So what's really awesome about the multidisciplinary approach that we use is over the course of the 4 or so years that we've been doing this program, we've seen a lot of the same names come up, be referred by different agencies, maybe by CPS, and then a year later by a school, or maybe by a doctor's office. And so working together in this multidisciplinary way, we can really look at and find the best, professional at our table to kind of outreach and work with that kid. So it's been really helpful in keeping track of where these levels are, where kids fall is their risk level. But here in Chautauqua County, the average age for trafficking is just shy of 14 years old, and that's pretty much the standard worldwide. We see kids enter trafficking at about 14. And here in Chautauqua, 91.43% of those 107 cases have been female. I think in this, about the past year that I've been in this program, we've had 2 boys referred to the program and 1 person that identifies as non-binary. Most of the time it's girls that we see. That too, though, could be a reporting issue. We know that boys are more or are less likely to report instances of sexual assault and other interpersonal violence. So that certainly could be at play here, because we tend to kind of default to she or her or the girl next door or whatever, but this does affect people of all genders. So who are the traffickers? Well, I was going to say, I lost my little paper here. So exploiters have been family members. We've talked a little bit about that. We've seen here in Chautauqua County, we've seen parents that have traded their kids in exchange for drugs. We've seen peers that have trafficked other peers, romantic partners, and other, I don't think we've seen this here, but in other parts of the country, we see educators, community leaders, clergy, anybody can do this, right? It doesn't really matter who you are. Traffickers are representative of all ages, ethnicities, and genders. And Jake mentioned a little bit about like the 2 main types of traffickers that we see. That would be like the Romeo pimp and the gorilla pimp. So the gorilla pimp, kind of like the name implies, it's somebody that uses force, a pimp who controls his victims almost entirely through physical violence and force. This is the type of pimp you see on TVs and movies. They're driving fancy cars, wearing snazzy outfits, lots of jewelry, that kind of thing. And then we have the Romeo pimps, also like the name implies. These are the guys that, and again, pimps can be women too, but they maintain control over their victims using psychological manipulation. So as the name implies, a Romeo pimp capitalizes on his victim's need to feel loved, seen, and desired. They use the boyfriending technique by romancing the victim with false feelings and promises to fill their voids and vulnerabilities. So this method kind of, it implies, it just creates this level of intimacy in a relationship that can be so hard to break. Like Jake was talking about how the dynamics of human trafficking are so similar to intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And we see that when, specifically when these pimps they vacillate back and forth. So they might start out being that Romeo pimp. They're gonna, wine and dine you, take you out, call you, lovely things, tell you you're beautiful, do this for you, do that for you, and then the next thing you know, they're beating you and throwing you, in a closet, right? So they're gonna go back and forth and play on that sense of trust that you're developing, and that, which I'm probably going ahead of myself too, but can lead into like Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding. So who are the buyers? So as Jake said, when we talk about trafficking, there's always 3 parties involved: the victim, the trafficker, and the buyer. So the buyer, really their demographic traits, again, are poor predictors of sex buying. Race and sexual orientation have almost no profiling power, but what we do find is that the majority of buyers slipping on my words, active high-frequency buyers are much more likely than others to be in a higher income bracket. So making $100,000 or more a year is typically what we see for buyers. And what drives sex buying? So there could be a lot of things that could drive somebody to buy sex, but what the research points to is these normalized beliefs about the commercial sex trade combined with interrelated ideas. So prostituted women, it's often thought that prostituted women enjoy the act, that it's mostly a victimless crime. Buyers are merely just taking care of their own needs, and they're just guys being guys, right? We hear this stuff all the time. And like Jake said, it's a crime of stealing someone's soul. So there's probably a lot of other reasons that can drive someone to buy sex, but these normalized beliefs tend to go across the board. So we've talked a little bit about the dynamics of human trafficking, how traffickers use severe power imbalance. Trafficking is modern day slavery. So we're gonna see that master and slave mentality. We're gonna see traffickers using privilege. They'll use gender, age, nationality to imply seniority or superiority over their victims. Again, traffickers will alternate between brutal and seductive behavior, going back and forth from that Romeo pimp to the gorilla pimp. And then also, again, like in domestic violence, we see that traffickers use social isolation to control their victims. So they cut off communication from family, friends, school perhaps. Oftentimes a trafficker will accompany their victim to public places. And they create, like Jake said, mistrust of authority figures and service providers. So oftentimes these, as Candace is going to get into, the risks and vulnerabilities which make somebody more susceptible, but being in the social welfare system is in itself a risk. And we know that kids that have been brought up in this system, families that have gone through this generational after generation, there is a lot of mistrust for authority and service providers. And, sometimes that is well-deserved, but it just makes, it's just another layer of this control that happens to victims. All right, so now Candace is talking to you about vulnerabilities, risk factors, red flags, and warning signs.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming out. Lots of times when we do these presentations, one common thing is people are always asking how they can help. And how you can help is exactly what you're doing tonight by coming out, getting educated, finding out what to look for, what are some of the risks, what are some of the vulnerabilities that we need to look for in our community, and spreading that word around to people you know. So what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit is the vulnerabilities, what we would look for as service providers, as community workers, what kind of people are vulnerable, and I don't know how to do this here. All right, there we go. Sorry. When we look at the list of vulnerabilities, we are going to often see what most youth are feeling with themselves. We have to know that as we learn about vulnerabilities and what kind of kids are vulnerable, those are the kids that we're going to want to keep our eyes on, the ones that we're going to want to protect, but it's also the ones that the sex traffickers and the predators are going to go after as well. They're very knowledgeable about what is vulnerable. They want to meet the needs, and this is how they bring them in. Then they start to coerce them, they start to manipulate them, and eventually they start to use this to force them to do what they want. So let's say experiencing feelings of being misunderstood. So along comes a trafficker that is someone who understands them, that can relate to them, that they want to develop romantic relationships. That's where you have the Romeo that comes in. It's giving them attention, showing them some, making them feel good about themselves, making them feel loved, experiencing feelings of insecurity, experiencing conflict with their parents and caregivers. They don't feel valued and loved by adults. Again, this is where they come in. They make them feel good about themselves. They're meeting their needs. They're giving them everything they want, and before they know it, they're under their spell. They want to be more independent. Most kids want to be independent. They don't like going to their parents and asking for things. So they like having their own money. They like being able to get things that the other kids have. Makes them feel more good about themselves. Some of the parents can't even provide for them. So again, they're giving them materialistic things, gifts, opportunities to make money. Some of the vulnerabilities are wanting attention and affection, wanting materialistic things. Oftentimes these kids are the kind of kids that will take risks. When they're traumatized, when they experience trauma in life, sometimes it gives them a hypervigilance. So they are used to living in a high stressful environment, so they're more apt to take risks. Also, anyone, I don't think we can see the last one, but anyone who has access to the internet is vulnerable. So as a parent, I talk to my kids about stranger danger. And when I see them at a park, when I see them at a store, and someone comes up and approaches them, I automatically intercept. I run over and say, what's going on? But at home, I often let my guard down. I let my kids play on their phones, I let them play on their computers, and especially with online schooling that we have today, I let them take them in their bedrooms and shut the door. So really what I'm doing is giving millions of strangers access, unsupervised, to my children. So it's really important that we have those table talks and we talk to our kids about how we really can't trust anything on the computer. We never really know who we're talking to. We don't know who's on the other end. And these predators will present themselves as younger than they are. Sometimes they even use other children to manipulate and bring those children in. So we really have to be careful with that. So some of the risk factors. Some kids and some populations are more at risk than others. Anyone who has a history of sexual or physical abuse. So those that have been trafficked, 57% of those that have been trafficked have a history of having sexual abuse, and 90% have a history of physical abuse. History of interaction with the foster care system. These kids are at higher risk because they are often moved around a lot, their relationships are broken, they don't have the stability that other kids have. Anyone who's unhoused, or youth who have run away. So in the United States, we have 41,000 unaccompanied minors that roam the streets homeless every night. So to give you an idea of what 41,000 is, the population of Jamestown is just over 29,000. So every night, 41,000 unaccompanied. That means there's no guardian, there's no adult. This is just a minor that's homeless. So of course they're going to be more susceptible to wanting a place to stay and getting into the survival sex like we talked about. There's a statistic that says 1 out of every 3 runaways within 48 hours, 1 out of every 3 will be seduced into sex trafficking. Any undocumented or unaccompanied child, that is somebody that's going to be under the radar, a child with developmental or intellectual disabilities, and youth who identify as LGBTQ. The LGBTQ population is highly at risk. They're often not accepted in the community. These are the kids that lots of times get bullied by their peers, by their families. 55% of youth that identify themselves as LGBTQ are forced out of their own homes by their parents. So what should we look for? Some red flags and warning signs. Chronic running away. So these are the kids that are missing a lot. You might hear them talking about staying in hotels. They have several different addresses. They're staying at different friends' houses. Using street slang for sex work. And this isn't just a child using a bad word. This is a kid that is talking inappropriately to their age about sexual acts, and they know a lot more than they should. They have a significant older partner or a friend. You know, they might constantly talk about this older friend that's always hanging around with them, gives them good advice, and buys them things. A number of sexual partners. Sometimes the children don't even realize that this is inappropriate, and they almost brag about having so many different partners. Sexually provocative social media posts. This is something that we see as a foster care worker or a CPS worker. Sometimes we see the kids, suddenly their social media posts very much more provocative. They might be posting pictures of drug use, money, staying in hotels, having items that they don't have means to. Again, all of a sudden they're starting to have the latest shoes, the latest phones. They get their nails done, their hair done, and when you ask them about it, they really don't have any good explanation, or their explanation will change frequently. Frequent school absences. This is just a couple days. We see like 2 weeks out of the month, and that's because they're working more than they're actually going to school. And with school being online, this is why it's really important with communities to know what to look for and look for these signs, because we're losing the eyes and ears of our teachers. So it's really important that when we do notice these red flags and these warning signs, that we do make a call, we do report anything suspicious. A lot of the times, the kids who have been trafficked, when interviewed, they said, you know, nobody ever asked me when I showed up with a black eye. No one ever asked me when I was dressed inappropriately in the wintertime, or when I was out walking the streets late at night. So don't be afraid to ask, especially when it's a younger kid. Again, anytime we see any indications or reports of domestic violence in a minor, we definitely should report it and check into it. Some of the physical red flags. Tattoos. Anytime you see a child with a tattoo, that should be a red flag. But we definitely are seeing the word daddy sometimes, person's name. We see scanner bars, and it's usually in a place where you can see. Multiple frequent STIs, pregnancies, miscarriages. Anytime they have an injury, the explanations are inconsistent, so they may tell you one time they fell, then you ask them again, they tell you a different story. Lots of times the traffickers will not let them get medical attention like they should. So it's not just a physical injury. There could be kids that aren't getting their diabetic medication, they're not getting their asthma medication. They don't want to bring them to medical facilities because this will draw attention to it. And any evidence of sexual abuse is a red flag. Any noticeable change in behavior is an emotional red flag. You might have a child that was once very social and outgoing, is now very quiet and reserved, and doesn't talk, doesn't hang out with their friends like they used to, and doesn't interact with their family. Or you may have a child that was very quiet and now they're acting out and they're being loud, they're physical, they might be cutting, anything that's a change in emotional and behavioral actions. Suicidal ideations, depression. You see this because these kids are experiencing trauma. What they're going through is very traumatic, and it does change their personalities. It causes depression and it causes anxiety. They're very afraid, they get paranoid. Many times they're threatened by their trafficker, so they're acting very different than they used to. They're very dependent on this friend. Again, that's lots of times an older person that's in their life suddenly. They won't do anything without talking to their friend first. And any gaps in their story. Anytime there's a red flag, it's always good to ask. So like we were talking about before, even sometimes when we see these red flags and we get these warning signs, and we might even build a relationship with this youth, but they're just not identifying themselves. And there's reasons for that. A lot of it's because of the stigma. Like, we don't want to admit that we're being sex trafficked, that there's a stigma in the community that they just don't want to face. Other times they're threatened. They're afraid that if they do come forward, they might get hurt. They might get their parents hurt, or friends, or some family members. Their reputation could be harmed. I mean, that's a big threat. Like, I'm going to tell your parents what you've been doing. I'm going to put this on social media. I'm going to take that photo you sent me and post it to your social media, and ruin your reputation. So that's another reason why they won't come forward and talk to you about it. And it's better than their old life. Like, as horrible as we think of sex trafficking, to some of these kids, it's better than what they had. They were still getting sexually abused. They were still getting physically abused, but at least now they have a place to sleep. They may have clothes now. They might have phones now that they didn't have before. There's social barriers. A lot of these kids have been raised to think that CPS and that police officers are a threat. They're afraid that they're going to go to jail. They're afraid that their families are going to be broken up or their parents are going to be taken to jail, so they won't come forward and admit it. There's also the normalization of the experience. Again, some of these they're just used to it. They say, well, you know, this is how it was. At least now I'm getting some nice things from it. I've got money in my pocket. I got a place to sleep every night. There's environmental barriers. A lot of times this is survival sex. This is what they do to feed their needs. It gives them food, gives them a place to stay. Some people don't think there's any other way that they'll be able to survive. They don't see how they're going to be able to get a job. And then at the bottom, you can't really see this, but it talks about taking away their identification. And I'm seeing this a lot, especially with my mom clients in my line of work. When I first started working, a lot of times they would lose their ID, they'd lose their EBT cards, and I thought they were being careless, or I thought someone was stealing them to use their money. But what I found is the traffickers are actually taking their ID. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do anything without ID, but it's almost impossible. You can't get a driver's license without a birth certificate. You can't get a job without a social security number. You can't get any social services without getting those IDs too. It's just really a circle of finding. They often lose their phones too. So they really get trapped when they don't have their IDs. Again, now I'm going to go back to Kaylee.
Awesome, thank you.
And again, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks. So we talked a bit about the multidisciplinary approach that we use with the Child Advocacy Program, Safe Harbor. We have the Western New York Regional Task Force where Jake's a member and can link us to them. So we have a lot of collaboration going. But one thing that I didn't mention about the Safe Harbor program is that I'm also a counselor. So I provide direct services to the kids that we've identified to be trafficked or at risk for trafficking in Chautauqua County. So to just kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, I'm trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That's one of the treatments that's like the gold star for trafficking victims, for youth trafficking victims. So we do that. We use that modality of treatment. I also started a group at CAP, at the Child Advocacy Program, where we have a group of girls, and given that it's COVID, it's a little different. We were able to, so these are all girls that have been identified to be at risk for trafficking. And we were able to get them like Kindles so they can all Zoom, and we Zoom for a group. We have a couple girls that come in person to our Jamestown office, a couple girls that go to our Fredonia office, then a bunch of girls that Zoom in on tablets. And we meet once a week for a therapeutic counseling group. So that's really awesome. We're teaching mindfulness skills, as well as other cognitive behavioral therapy skills. And I'm also a registered yoga teacher. So we've been doing yoga with the girls, which has been awesome. So if you know anything about yoga and trauma, they go hand in hand. So we're doing that stuff. So that's some of the actual work that we're doing here in Chautauqua County. And we also started to work, so we mentioned a few times about like the online safety stuff, right? So traffickers are using social networking sites like Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok to meet their victims. And we often, we're coming across a lot of different situations that didn't really happen when I was growing up because the internet was very different. So I'm working with a bunch of kids right now that have displayed like kind of maybe risky online sexual behavior, some problematic sexual behavior online. And we're working with them to build up digital resilience and teach kids how to use the internet for good, right? So that's just some other things we're doing outside of the multidisciplinary approach and the ongoing training and awareness events. So with that, I think that pretty much wraps up Safe Harbor, but you're all here because you want to do something about this. So here's Jessica.
All right. Before I get started, I really want to thank Kaylee and Jake and Candace for coming out tonight. We talked a little bit about how there's just been this increased amount of chatter about human trafficking all over the internet, and I often see a lot of inaccurate information that's being shared. And I called up Kaylee one day and I said, we need to do something, right? Like, I'm a doer. I just need to do things when there's a problem to fix it. And I called her up, I said, we need to do something. We have all of these people who are using their voices and their platforms on social media to talk about this and raise awareness, but we want to make sure that the people are informed, accurately informed by professionals who are doing the work and not, bloggers or memes, the ways that people are getting their information these days. And so I asked her to set this up because I wanted to, first of all, get correct information out there before we started to do some community action work. But second of all, I wanted to give people the opportunity to get involved in that community action work. So one of the things that we have going on are going to be started. If you're interested, after we talk about this, on that table where you checked in, you'll find a card for our human trafficking community action follow-up meeting, which we'll be hosting here on October 8th here at Conduit. We'll be inside, so it'll be warmer. And Kaylee and I are going to be leading that, and that will be an opportunity for she and I to share some ideas that we've had for the community to get involved in raising awareness around trafficking, but then also for all of us who are interested in joining that team to brainstorm some ideas, or like to hear your ideas for ways to raise awareness in the community. So if you're interested in that, on the table over here, after we're finished, you can grab one of these cards. There's a sign-up list there just so we have an idea of how many people will be coming that night. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about that you can do to take some actionable steps towards raising awareness and prevention in our community. But the second one is to support the Child Advocacy Program and the Safe Harbor Program. Like Kaylee said, I started Safe Harbor in 2016. That's when we started to receive funding. And it's a program that's funded on a bell curve from the state, right? We maxed out funding 2018, and it's been on the decline, and at the end of this year, that funding will go away for Chautauqua County. So to sustain that program, there's, and Kaylee's position and the work that's been going on, they are looking for monetary donations to sustain that program, but also there's some other ways that you can contribute financially to CAP for things like covering the cost of counseling sessions for the victims that Kaylee's working with, or some of the other counselors there, because they offer those services free to the girls in our community, so, or the children in our community. They are also will also take donations for gift cards or services to survivors. So some of the examples of things like that might be a hair cutting gift certificate, or a phone card for a cell phone. I remember not long after I started my work, hearing about girls who were trading sex acts to get their cell phone turned on for the month, right? Just to stay connected to people. So I know that at one point we were trying to raise some money for the child advocacy program to be, I'm not going to cry, I'm shivering. I'm trying not to like chatter my teeth into the microphone. It wouldn't be weird if I cried though, if you know. But I just remember hearing that these girls were trading sex acts for phone cards. So haircuts, Tim Hortons gift cards, so they can just kind of get some of the needs that they have met without having to rely on other people. They are also looking for volunteers at the child advocacy program, and that might look a little bit different now because of COVID, but if you connect with Kaylee in the back, if you're interested in helping out at the child advocacy program, that's something else that they're looking for. And then another one is linkages to external agencies or businesses that they can partner and provide this kind of education to people there, whether it like maybe even at another church or other community organization, a business. I know that Kaylee's done lots of like doctor's offices and those kind of things, but if you work at a place that hasn't received training or education around human trafficking, and you think that you might be in contact with some vulnerable populations, she's able to offer that. Thank you. That's really nice of you. It's my husband. And then, so you can connect with Kaylee about all of those things that we talked about for the Child Advocacy Program in Safe Harbor. And then the last way that I'm going to talk to you about getting involved, did I pull this out?
No.
Okay. Getting involved in trafficking prevention work in our county is through getting involved with the BRAVE program. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background story to how this all applies before I give you the details of that. But I left Safe Harbor, the position that Kaylee's in, last May to come on staff here at Conduit. I've been at Conduit for 5 years, just coming and on the leadership team for 3 years now. And when a position opened to come on staff here, I said yes, because it doesn't happen often. And I was answering a call to ministry that I wasn't sure what it looked like, but I figured if I said yes to this job, I might figure it out. So I came on staff here, and not long after that, I heard of an organization called Brave Global, which addresses human trafficking in girls ages 11 through 18 through prevention through empowerment. So it's a way that the church and thankfully many community partners and other churches and individuals in our community dove headfirst into with us, and we have been doing lots of work connecting with girls in our community. Brave Global was founded by Danielle Strickland. She used to be the social justice chair for the Salvation Army International, and she had come in contact with tons and tons of trafficking survivors and just had asked them many questions about, like, how did you end up here? You know, like, what happened? And after listening to their stories over and over again, they this is where I might cry. They were women who said, like, when I was 11, my dad raped me for the last time, and I ran away from home, and I didn't have, like Jake was talking about earlier, the survival sex. I didn't have a place to stay, and somebody said, if you do this for me, I'll give you a place to stay, right? And she kind of was like, this is going to happen to me. I'm going to have control over it. And Danielle was just like, enough is enough, right? Let's give these girls an opportunity to form healthy, safe connection sooner. And that started with the church, because some of the stuff that she heard was like, I walked by churches every day when I was being trafficked or when I was in the foster care system. And the churches weren't reaching out to me. Like, I just felt unseen. So Brave, she started this organization that does things such as a big annual event. Last October 19th, I think it was, we hosted our first Brave annual event here in Jamestown downtown at the Willow Bay Theater. And in our first year, we had nearly 500 people attend, I think close to 300 girls and their caregivers. And it was just a day of empowerment and loving on them and showing them the love of Jesus, but just showing them. Like, a lot of people, we heard from lots of girls, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you giving us all of these things? Like, why? You know, and just because we love you. And some of them were just so blown away that we would do it just because we love them, right? And so an event doesn't fix it. We know that. So there's ongoing programming with our Brave program, including things like our Brave Circles, which are like small group style, youth group style meetups for girls. We have one starting here at Conduit next week. I know that there'll be one in Bemis. Kaylee's using some of the same stuff like in that group that she talked about. We have Brave issues or comes out with different journals for girls to walk through. Last year's journal was This Is Me, which is an identity-focused thing. Next year, our event that was scheduled for a few weeks from now is going to be This Is Us themed, which was healthy boundaries or healthy relationships and boundary setting, that kind of thing. So lots of topics like that, but we walk through those with the girls. And then we also last year had we called it Brave and Powerful, a girls' self-defense class at Kinetics on 2nd Street. Pastor Cameron actually taught that with a couple other people, and I think we had 22 girls go through that free of cost. Like they weren't, they didn't have to pay for that program at all. 6 weeks of self-defense classes for free. So we have ongoing programming, and since COVID kind of is interfering with our plans for another big event downtown, we have teamed up with Brave Global to offer a virtual watch party for a small amount of girls in a social distancing, safe guide, following all the rules way here in the sanctuary next month. And if you see Kaylee back at the Brave table in the corner, not this Kaylee, there's lots of Kayleys. She can help you donate financially to send some girls there if you're interested. So there's lots of ways you can get involved tangibly with human trafficking awareness raising and prevention. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kaylee. Thank you.
Thank you. So that kind of wraps it up. So turning it over to you, is there any questions for any of us that we can clarify or maybe expand on? Anyone have any questions or comments? All right. Well, I will leave. This is all of our contact information. Might be hard to see, so feel free to come up here and see it on the computer. But we'll be at our tables. Stop by, ask us any questions. Yes?
I'm sorry. The donations, can we just send it to the address for the church? And what do you want in like a memo note, or is there?
Yes, you can send it right to the church. Put in the memo note for Brave.
Brave. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you all so much for coming. Sorry again about the late start, and we appreciate you spending your time with us and for your commitment to our community.